Part 55. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocnu. Chapter 541. Next, Baron and the others told the old village chief all their experiences along the way, especially describing the scene where Muchu rescued them in the Colosseum. This moved the old village chief to tears, and he was so grateful to Muchu, the holy envoy who came from the ancestral land, that he almost knelt down and kowtowed. Muchu always looked calm and indifferent, and the people around him looked at Muchu with respect and fear. The breath released by Muchu just now was too terrifying, and the moment of life and death when someone strangled his breath made them feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. But the old village chief obviously did not notice the changes in his people. He excitedly leaned on his cane and said, "Today, the holy envoy came to the North Desert and brought back the lost treasures of our people. It is really a great blessing for our people. I will definitely hold a big banquet to celebrate. I hope the holy envoy will not refuse." Muchu did not reply, but turned his head to look at Elder Chuanzi, who was standing quietly with red pupils and a respectful face, and smiled at the village chief. "I have something to say to him, www." The old village chief immediately understood that this was a confidential meeting between the holy envoys from the ancestral land. Not daring to disturb, he immediately sent someone to take Muchu and others to the residence specially prepared for the holy envoy. In a moment, under the guidance of the villagers, Muchu, Chuanzi, and others came to a luxury suite deep in the village. Although the brick and tile house in front of them was still dilapidated, it was at least luxurious compared to other houses built with sand and stones in the village. "Saint Envoy, please take a rest. The village chief is preparing a dinner for you." A villager took Muchu to the tile house and bowed and left. This was the residence of Elder Chuans and others before, but the human tribe subordinates who followed from their ancestral land behind Chuans did not dare to move at all. Because their boss was now obediently following Muchu and showing great courtesy, like a pug wagging its tail to win favor. Muchu pushed open the door. There were some simple furnishings in the room, and a chair woven with rattan was placed next to the bed. Muchu sat on the chair, stroked the black cat in his arms, and smiled. "What is the purpose of your coming here?" Muchu's tone was extremely calm, as if it was an ordinary conversation. Chuanzi, who was standing in front of Muchu, looked dazed for a while, and suddenly a red light shone in the depths of his eyes. He said dully, "In order to obtain the magic weapon left by the demon lord in the Forbidden Land." Muchu nodded. Looking at the vast Bamo human race, only that magic weapon could attract the attention of the human ancestral land. Thinking of Alien and others working so hard to find the traces of the stone plate, it is estimated that they were also instructed by these ancestral land human races. In the eyes of the human race scattered in various territories, the Yuhe ancestral land is their final destination, and being able to enter the ancestral land is a blessing to glorify the ancestors. Muchu then asked, "What is the relationship between the fire organization and the human ancestral land?" At this time, the subordinates beside Chuanzi also saw the problem and stared at Muchu with puzzled eyes. Not to mention that they had never seen this person in the ancestral land, how could the holy envoy in front of them not know the relationship between the ancestral land and the fire? A man stood up and pointed at Muchu and asked, "No, an elder from the ancestral land would never ask such a question. What on earth are you?" "Shut up." Muchu raised his hand and swung out a flash of lightning, which flew through the sky and instantly pierced the man's forehead. The man was instantly turned into charred powder under the scorching lightning. Before other subordinates could react, a flash of blood suddenly appeared in Muchu's eyes, and 6 megatamas circled in his eyes, gathering into a blood moon. The many subordinates who were illuminated by the blood were instantly shocked, and then they knelt on the ground like puppets, with dull expressions. Having swallowed many kinds of soul-related superpowers, coupled with the power of the soul fruit and the Sheri non-illusion, Mu had already thoroughly studied the spells of the soul, and this ability similar to hypnosis was born from this. Even the lords of the destruction level will be affected to a certain extent, not to mention Chuanzi and other humans whose strength is only at the level of demon generals. Qi Xiaoxiao, who was standing next to Mu, was shocked by the scene and looked at Mu with admiration, with little stars in her eyes. After witnessing his men being killed, Chuanzi's eyes had several complex fluctuations, but he quickly returned to normal and said, "The founders of the fire seed are several elders in the ancestral land, and the fire seed consciousness in the major territories was also spread by several elders." Mu nodded. As he expected, this fire seed organization that rose among the human race was indeed related to the ancestral land of the human race. It is just not clear what the human ancestral land is planning to establish the fire seed organization. It is nothing but a dream and a fantasy for the weak human race to fight against the entire Eternal Night Dynasty. When Mu asked about this topic, Chuanzi, the holy envoy, knew nothing about it and only said that he was ordered to take away the magic soldiers of the previous demon lord. After that, Mu asked Chuanzi about some unknown secrets of the ancestral land, and the latter also revealed all of them, which made Qi Xiaoxiao beside him open her mouth slightly and stare in amazement. "Master!" Mu felt someone pulling his clothes, and when he looked down, he found that the beast-eared girl was looking at him aggrievedly, and pouted in the direction of Chuanzi and the others. "I want to learn this." The girl was referring to Mu's ability to control Chuanzi and the others. Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and reached out to rub the girl's head. "Good boy, you can't learn it?" "Who?" The whistling wind swept along the yellow sand, bringing up a large piece of sand and dust to wash the surface of the rock. A well-equipped orc army was speeding across the desert in a certain direction. This orc army was fully armed, and it was obvious that they had received professional training, with uniform steps and fierce momentum. Suddenly, the sand in front of them exploded, and a giant centipede several feet long rushed out from deep underground. However, the well-trained orc army was not panicked at all. A group of orcs waved the magic soldiers in their hands and launched a fierce siege on the giant centipede. In just a short moment, the huge desert poisonous creature was killed on the spot by the fierce siege of the orcs. Some orcs skillfully picked up the scimitar to cut open the centipede's head, looking for the crystal core inside. Some orcs began to dismember the centipede. This kind of wilderness monster is a treasure. The limbs can be processed into materials for making magic soldiers, the venom can be used as poison, and even the flesh and blood are extremely precious. The whole process was handled very quickly, and in a blink of an eye, the orc army rushed towards the destination again. "Viper, are you sure those humans live in this place?" In front of the team, a bear-shaped orc wearing iron armor looked at the desolate gobi around him, and there was a little doubt in his low voice. "The desert gobi here is simply sparsely populated by living creatures, with no grass growing, and it doesn't look like a human habitation at all." At this time, a feminine voice came from the side. "Han Xiong, don't doubt my ability. I remember the breath on that stone plate very clearly. As long as it doesn't leave Bamo, I can sense it anywhere." The one who spoke was a white giant python with a snake body and a human head swimming in the sand. He was very confident in his ability in his tone. His innate ability is quite unique. He can mark everything he has touched and sense the location of the items at any time. Although the breath of that stone plate always disappears inexplicably, the direction where it finally appears is deep in this Gobi desert. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 542. I hope your perception is not wrong. After all, the Lord will personally take action this time. There is a ferocious scar from the corner of the fierce bear's eye that extends to the corner of its mouth. Every time it opens its mouth, the scar squirms, adding a bit of ferocity to it. If such a big battle ends up in vain, you should know the methods of the Lord. Hearing the threat in the fierce bear's voice, the viper was not moved at all, and a cruel smile appeared on his pale face. After the death of Locust, the Lord's demon general will only have two of us. Naturally, we will both prosper and suffer. He was about to say something more, but suddenly the sky above his head was shrouded in dark clouds. In an instant, the wind suddenly rose, and a raging momentum fell from the sky, instantly arousing the vigilance of the orc army. Who dares to make a mistake in front of the northern desert beast army? The orcs below looked up and saw a cavalry legion riding warcraft flying from the sky. A man at the head was riding a giant eagle beast with extraordinary momentum. His face was arrogant and his expression was extremely indifferent. Although he has a human face, this man's skin is blue and purple, and he has a pair of devil-like horns on his head. Seeing this man with a human face, the orcs below immediately knelt down in panic and exclaimed, "See His Royal Highness the Crown Prince!" Even the leading vipers and ferocious bears shrank their pupils when they saw the figure riding on the eagle beast, and bowed to greet him. The man on the eagle beast nodded slightly, his expression was as usual, and he spoke in a questioning tone. "Demon generals under Lord Machin? What are you doing here?" The man looked down at the many orcs below with an innate arrogance. In response to the man's question, Xiong Xiong seemed a little flustered, his tone was hesitant, and he hesitated. We are here to exterminate the fire organization in the northern desert under the orders of the Lord." The arrogant man did not hear the abnormality in Xiong Xiong's voice and just nodded. The human race in the northern desert should really be rectified. He was about to leave with his men, but he was suddenly stopped by the viper below. "Your Majesty, please stay." The arrogant man turned around. "What else can I do?" Under the surprised gaze of the fierce bear, the viper slowly said, "The story of His Majesty the Crown Prince searching for his wife across thousands of miles has spread throughout the northern desert, but has His Majesty the Crown Prince ever thought that maybe the person you are looking for is not in a common town?" "Oh? You mean?" The man known as His Royal Highness narrowed his eyes. "I saw a smile on the corner of Viper's mouth. My men once saw a figure who was suspected to be the Crown Prince's concubine at an auction. At that time, she was followed by a human being of fire type." "What?" The prince's expression finally became moved, and he heard Viper continue. "Although my subordinates are not sure that she is the Crown Princess, I feel that I should inform His Highness the Crown Prince." The prince's chest rose and fell as he rode on the back of the eagle beast, and he turned his gaze to the depths of the Gobi ahead. After a while, he raised his head and looked at the orc army below. "I understand, I will go with you in this operation to exterminate the human race's fire." After saying that, he led the cavalry regiment with hundreds of people behind him and headed deep into the Gobi. Looking at His Royal Highness the Crown Prince's retreating figure, Fierce Bear looked at Viper suspiciously. "Did you really find the trace of the Crown Princess?" Viper did not speak until the dark clouds covering the sky dispersed, then he slowly shook his head. The Fierce Bear immediately widened his eyes. "Are you crazy? If His Highness the Crown Prince knows that you lied to him, even the Lord will not be able to protect you." To be able to make the Fierce Bear lose his temper like this, it is obvious that the prince has a good background. But Viper sneered. "You usually seem quite courageous, why are you so timid at a time like this?" The scales on the Viper's pale face stood up, and a gleam flashed in his eyes. "Do you think there is a future for you if you follow the Lord, or if you join the army of an owl king?" The fierce bear's expression changed, and the look of shock on his face was even worse than before. The reason why they were so afraid of the Crown Prince was not because of how powerful he was, but because the person standing behind him was a true king of kings. And the fierce bear's plan to exterminate the fire was just a perfunctory rhetoric. Their real target for this trip was the legendary supreme magic soldier sealed in the forbidden land of the human race. "You mean?" Viper looked around and whispered. "Since we have to hand over the things we get, why not use this magic weapon to find a future for ourselves?" Give that magic weapon to the crown prince, and we'll join the king of owls. The fierce bear's eyes were shocked. He didn't expect that his companion who had been beside him for so many years would actually have a bone in his head. He hurriedly said, "Aren't you afraid of the Lord's wrath? Send me the magic soldiers. By then we will all be protected by the King Xiao, so why should we be afraid of him, a little lord?" Tianlai Novel Network. The Scarlet Snake was hesitant. It was obvious that the Viper's plan had been planned for a long time. Now that the prince has agreed to join us, even if the Lord comes, it will be of no avail. Han Xiong, the matter is done. You and I are meant to be together, so why not fight for it? You will be promoted to the position of Lord in the future. The words of Viper were very bewitching, and Han Xiong's eyes kept changing, looking at the darkening sky in the distance. Finally, he clenched his teeth and showed a ferocious look. "Let's take a gamble." The Viper once again resumed his feminine laughter. "Is that right? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 543. In the Gobi Desert, large bonfires burned in the silent night sky. In the center of the ancient village, flames soared into the sky, and countless villagers cheered and gathered around the fire, wearing different costumes and dancing some kind of tribal dance used for sacrifice and celebration. The table made of rock was filled with the flesh and blood of various weird monsters, roasting under the boiling flames to create bursts of meaty aroma. The village chief even took out the fine wine that had been stored in the village for many years. The rich aroma of wine mixed with the aroma of barbecue floated in the air. Even in some major sacrificial festivals, the village has never held such a sumptuous banquet. Every villager's face is filled with a cheerful smile, all because of one thing that makes everyone particularly happy. The key to the forbidden area that had been lost for many years in their village was found. Lord Kawazawa, who came from the ancestral land, promised that as long as he handed over the magic weapon guarded in the forbidden area, he could lead them back to live in the ancestral land. The ancestral land of Jade Sea is a holy land that almost all races yearn for. There are rules and restrictions set by the ancestors there, and all races are in trouble. As long as they enter the Jade Sea ancestral land, it means that they will completely stay away from this precarious life and become an upright person. Aubelang and others who returned from outside the village were surrounded by the villagers in front of the fire, singing and dancing, which was very lively. Even Chi Xiao Xiao, who had a pair of furry animal ears on his head, was kindly treated by everyone because of Mu Chiu's relationship. After being entertained with fine wine and delicious food, his flat belly bulged. Chi Xiao Xiao slumped down at the stone table with a satisfied look on her face. After sleeping and sleeping in the wilderness for a while, the little girl finally had a full meal. Just when the entire village was filled with a festive atmosphere of joy and joy, a lone figure sat on the sand dunes where the firelight had not yet illuminated. Alien looked at the noisy banquet not far away, with a slight smile on her lips, but there was a look of loneliness in her eyes that could not be concealed. The cold wind of the northern desert blew along the sand dunes. Her short fiery red hair swayed with her windbreaker, and her back looked particularly desolate on the sand dunes. "What's on your mind?" At this moment, a magnetic voice suddenly came from behind. Hearing the familiar voice, Alien turned around suddenly, only to find a slender figure coming from behind. "Senior." With the help of the boiling firelight, Mu Chiu, wearing a black windbreaker, walked slowly from the shadows, holding two ceramic-sized wine jars in his hands. Throwing one of the wine jars to Alien who was sitting on the sand dune, Mu Chiu raised the wine jar in her hand and took a sip. The wine given by the village chief had been brewing for an unknown number of years. As soon as I opened the lid, the aroma of the wine overflowed and the taste was mellow. Miu had never been interested in this kind of jubilant atmosphere. She originally wanted to go to see the forbidden area of the village in advance, but she didn't expect to see a lonely alien here. Alien took the wine jar and looked at Miu's face for a second, then picked up the wine jar and looked at the noisy banquet in the distance, murmuring, "Everyone, I'm very happy." Hearing the sense of loss in the woman's words, Miu smiled and said, "But you seem a little unhappy." Alien shook her head, and there seemed to be flames flashing in her pupils under the firelight. "It was my father's long-cherished wish to lead everyone back to their ancestral land." She took a sip of the strong wine in her arms and looked at her younger brother who was in the crowd in the distance, as if he was being held in high esteem by the stars. The expression on her face was even more complicated. "My father and Au's father were once the leaders of fire in the northern desert." Miu had a smile on her lips, looking like she was listening. "Our village is located in the Gobi Desert where no grass grows. When Au and I were young, the food supply in the village relied on the magic crystals our father obtained from hunting monsters. But until one day, when we went to the town to exchange supplies with my father was regarded as a runaway slave by a nobleman, and in full view of the public, he ordered his men to commit violence against him." As if recalling bad memories, Alien bit her lower lip tightly, lowered her head, and 2 lines of tears ran across the corners of her eyes. "For us who were young at that time, my father who was a demon general was willing to endure the insults and beatings from the nobles. In the end, my dying father was dragged away on the street, but we could only watch helplessly as there was blood all over the ground, helpless. Since then, we have never seen my father again." Alien raised her head, wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and apologized to Miu. "I'm sorry, Senior, for making you laugh." She didn't know why she, who had always been strong, was so out of sorts tonight. Maybe she was inspired by the long-lost joy of the villagers. Since her father passed away, Alien has shouldered the heavy burden on his father's shoulders, and with her outstanding talent, she has continued to strive to grow despite the extreme lack of resources. He eventually advanced to the demon general level and took over his father's position as the leader of fire. After listening to Alien's story, Miu just nodded thoughtfully without showing any sympathy. In the apocalypse, there are many things more cruel than this. In the final analysis, it is just a different form. He looked meaningfully at the bright moon in the sky and said calmly, "I have always believed that all misfortunes in the world are due to the lack of ability of the people involved. Class differences have existed since ancient times, and now the scope has only been expanded to the entire human race. In the same situation, if Miu came, it would only be a word of killing. He would kill as many people as came, and no one in the world would dare to commit the crime. It's that simple. Is your ability insufficient?" Alien nodded. She was not qualified to refute Miu's words, because the facts were like this. "You are somewhat similar to someone I have met." Although she was also troubled by her inner demons, she never stopped moving forward. Miu thought of Yefanyan, who was favored by the heaven and was called the Wind Spirit Sword Princess by the world. The latter was confused about the unknown fate, but she had been improving her strength and trying to break free from the shackles of fate. Only by having enough strength can you jump out of the chessboard of fate. Whether it is you or the entire human race, it is the same. Miu took another sip of wine. He was just simply speaking out of his feelings and saying a bunch of nonsense that everyone knew. As for the future of the human race, it had nothing to do with him. After all, he had long ceased to be a human being. Alien pondered over Miu's words, a glimmer of light in her eyes. She felt that the man standing next to her, who seemed to be of the same age as her, was unfathomable. Nodding, Alien stood up and bowed slightly to Miu, with a faint spark in her eyes. "Senior, I will make myself stronger, strong enough to protect all my companions around me." Miu laughed and shook his head, and said, "Your name is Alien, right. Alien shook her fiery red short hair, raised the wine jar to Mu Chiu, and then drank it all, looking heroic. Hong Lian, my name is Hong Lian. In the distance, the carnival of mankind continued, and the boiling bonfire continued to rise along the sky, as if the rising flames were rising to the other side of the distant shore. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 544. The next morning, under the leadership of Hong Lian and others, Mu Chiu walked towards the back mountain of the village. Standing next to Mu Chiu was the beast-eared girl Chi Xiao, whom he had bought. After a full meal, the girl looked radiant and energetic. Behind the two of them, elder Chuans and other humans who came out of the ancestral land respectfully followed them. Their respectful appearance was astonishing. www. But if you look closely, you can vaguely see a strange red light in the depths of these people's eyes. The villagers on both sides looked at Mu Chiu and others walking towards the back mountain with burning eyes, and their expressions were excited. When the Saint Envoy entered the forbidden area to take out the treasure, it meant that they could leave this vast desert and enter the ancestral land they had been thinking about day and night. The humans who have lived here for nearly 1,000 years have been passed down from generation to generation, but they have long forgotten the mission passed down by their ancestors. And under the leadership of the village chief and others, everyone soon arrived at the forbidden area in the back mountain of the village. It was not until they approached the huge cliff at a close distance that they could see the true face of the so-called forbidden area. The back mountain in front of them was more like a towering cliff made of sand and stone. There was no grass on the rock, and only a groove could be vaguely seen on the mountainside. There were vague words engraved in ancient characters on the mountain, which roughly meant that this was a forbidden area for the human race and no living creature was allowed to step into it. Of course, everyone who came here ignored the ancestral precepts engraved on it and walked directly to the bottom of the mountain. Seeing that their lives were about to be lost, who would care about the ancestral precepts on it? Mu Chiu looked at the towering mountain in front of him and asked the beast-eared girl beside him. Do you feel anything? Chi Xiao shook her head. She couldn't see any clues from the surface. Senior, this is the forbidden area where the magic weapon held by the demon lord is sealed. Hong Lian turned and looked at Mu Chiu with a questioning look in her eyes. Mu Chiu nodded slightly, a faint purple light flashed on his chest, and he took out the 7-color stone plate from the box of the monster. The moment the stone plate appeared, the 7-color light flashed on it, and the stone plate itself was eager to rush into the mountain. When the 7-color light on the stone plate shot into the groove on the surface of the mountain, the huge cliff began to shake violently. Countless sandstone fragments slid down the mountain, accompanied by a boom sound, and a huge gate several meters long gradually opened in front of the cliff. The forbidden land is open. The old village chief's hands were shaking with his crutches, and his turbid eyeballs trembled slightly. The ancestors' thousands of years of perseverance were finally broken here. Hong Lian, Baron, and others looked at each other and decided to take the lead, leading Mu Chiu and others to slowly step into the gate opened in the mountain. As soon as Fang stepped into the forbidden space, an extremely wide tunnel appeared in front of everyone. The material of the tunnel is not the sand and soil as everyone imagined, but a piece of hard blue rock. Is this the interior of the forbidden area? Au opened his mouth and looked at the surrounding scene. What they have heard and seen since childhood makes them very curious about the forbidden area in the back mountain. What is surprising is that even in the long-sealed mountain, the air inside is extremely fresh, not as thin as imagined. As the steps approached, the space of the tunnel became larger and larger, and even some spreading vines could be seen in the cracks of blue bricks and rocks. Everyone was very surprised by this. In this barren sand, plants can be seen. Only Mu Chiu raised one hand to catch the water drops dripping from the cracks of the rocks, feeling the faint vitality coming from the depths of the tunnel, and narrowed his eyes slightly. The way of life and death, live towards death. Chi Xiao beside him seemed to have felt something, and subconsciously moved closer to Mu. As everyone continued to go deeper into the cave-like tunnel, the ground gradually became flat, and eerie skeletons gradually appeared on both sides of the tunnel. The entire forbidden area was sealed in the giant cliff, which means that these bones have existed in the forbidden area for thousands of years, but there is no trace of erosion by time. Hong Lian looked at the bones on the ground in front of him and suddenly remembered the legend. It is said that the demon lord 1,000 years ago was besieged by the army of corpses. At the critical moment, he broke through the avenue and finally killed the powerful enemy to become the demon lord. Could these bones be the zombie monsters that besieged the demon lord 1,000 years ago? After Hong Lian finished speaking, Baron and others looked at the bones on the ground with inexplicable fear. Although 1,000 years have passed, the legend of the apocalyptic disaster is still circulating among the human race. It was precisely because of that terrible disaster that the status of the human race has undergone earth-shaking changes. Every skeleton here is a zombie transformed from a human during the catastrophe. Although they have long since turned into a pile of dry bones, they still make them feel creepy. Everyone be careful, these bones may still carry corpse poison from thousands of years ago. Hong Lian warned, and the quiet voice echoed deep in the tunnel. Mu Chu's eyes suddenly flashed, as if he sensed something, and said, "The breath of life and death here has begun to transform." Before everyone understood what Mu Chu meant, a Yu suddenly pointed in a direction and opened his mouth. "Look, look there." Everyone looked in the direction of the sound, and saw that the vines climbing in the cracks of the rocks turned yellow and withered at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally showed a strange black color. An unimaginable dark evil spirit surged up from the depths of the passage, affecting everyone's mind. Hong Lian seemed to feel something, her eyes trembled, and she hurriedly said, "Not good, get out of here quickly." As soon as Hong Lian's voice fell, a sudden change occurred. "Ka. I saw that the black evil spirit filled the tunnel space, and the skeletons and bones that collapsed in the tunnel slowly moved the moment they came into contact with the evil spirit." Roar. The empty eye sockets were replaced by dark soul fire composed of evil spirits. These zombie bones that had been silent for thousands of years were resurrected under the effect of the evil spirit. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 545. Roar. The terrifying low moan that belongs only to the corpse clan came from the mouths of countless skeletons. After being infected with the fierce evil spirit, the skeletons stood up trembling all over. The dark eye sockets were occupied by the soul fire condensed by the evil spirit. There was a crisp sound from the bones, and they opened their empty jaws and roared at Mu Chu and others. After a short period of adaptation, the resurrected zombie skeletons rushed towards the humans in front of them without hesitation. "No, run." Baron and others were shocked and subconsciously wanted to flee to the tunnel they came from. However, as soon as they turned their heads, they froze in place. In the passage where they came from, the skeletons on the ground also stood up, with a burst of purple-black evil spirit all over their bodies, rushing towards them with fangs and claws. "Damn it, fight them!" The burly Baron roared, his thick arms had turned black iron, trying to resist the attacks from the skeleton zombies with his flesh. People like Hong Lian and Au also attacked the zombies. As the few aliens in the village, they naturally became the pioneers in the team. Hong Lian shouted, and balls of fire burst out of her fists. The scorching fire fists smashed the nearby skeletons into pieces. How could he die here before leading the tribe back to the ancestral land? Even Elder Chuans and the dozen or so human men he brought from the ancestral land joined the melee with the skeleton zombies. Mu Chu implanted a suggestive command similar to hypnosis in their minds. Except for unconditionally obeying the instructions set by Mu Chu in certain circumstances, their behavior style was no different from their original selves. However, even with the participation of Chuanzi, a senior 9th-level demon general, in the battle, the human side still gradually fell into decline. Dozens of humans struggled to resist the resurrected dead bones, but these skeleton zombies showed no signs of decreasing. In a short moment, the narrow tunnel was already filled with the broken corpses of skeleton zombies. Roar! Endless evil spirits spread from the depths of the tunnel, and more zombie skeletons woke up from their slumber and launched a fierce attack on dozens of creatures in the tunnel. The bodies of these skeletons were zombies from thousands of years ago. After thousands of years of silence, they were awakened by the evil spirits, and their strength had long been reduced to 1/10. But the unimaginable number alone was far beyond the ability of Hong Lian and others to resist. As time passed, everyone felt a sense of exhaustion, and the magic energy in their bodies continued to drain, but the number of corpses did not decrease. Deep in the passage, there was a faint sound of even more terrifying magic fluctuations. Is this the alternation of the way of life and death? It's quite interesting. Just when everyone was struggling to resist the life and death of the zombie skeletons, Mu-Chiu stood in the dark tunnel, watching the corpses occupied by the ghostly soul fire not far away. Although the way of life and death is not as treacherous and changeable as the 6 paths of reincarnation, nor as strong and overbearing as the great way of kingship, the changes between life and death are quite exquisite. However, Mu-Chiu also has similar abilities. For example, the Oracle Gigzu in his Sherry non-pupil technique focuses on the changes between reality and illusion. The Eternal Night Royal family was created by combining the way of reality and illusion with his unique insights into the soul, plus the flesh of the Black Shadow core. Mu-Chiu nodded secretly, and he had already understood the way of life and death in his heart. Roar! Just then, a skeleton zombie in the distance found Mu-Chiu standing in place, roared, and stumbled towards Mu-Chiu. Little thing, didn't I tell you, don't make any noise when the senior is thinking. The white skeleton rushed over, and Mu-Chiu's narrowed eyes suddenly opened in the next moment, and the deep pupils were gradually replaced by a touch of crimson. The corpse chi in the blood mixed with the power of the pupil technique of the Oracle Gigzu was released at this moment. The body of the skeleton zombie rushing towards Mu-Chiu stagnated for a moment, and then the ghostly evil soul fire in the eye socket was instantly swallowed up, and the white skeleton instantly turned into dust in the air and dissipated. Immediately afterwards, the invisible corpse chi mixed with the power of the pupil technique spread in all directions like a tide. The corpse chi collided with the boundless evil chi emerging from the depths of the passage, and the latter was instantly swallowed up. And those white bone remains that touched the corpse chi all stopped in place, and then turned into white flying ashes and fell to the ground, disappearing at this point. Hong Lian and the others were still fighting hard with the skeleton zombies that were rushing over, but strangely found that the skeletons in front of them stopped in place. This is... Before they could react, they suddenly felt a suffocating palpitation, and their hearts seemed to explode. However, this feeling lasted for less than a breath. When they came to their senses, they were surprised to find that the skeleton zombies around them had turned into ashes all over the ground. What on earth is going on? Everyone was breathing heavily, and there was still fear in their eyes. Only Qi Xiaoxiao, who had superb 5 senses, seemed to have noticed something and carefully glanced at Mu-Chiu beside him. Mu-Chiu turned around and smiled at the girl with animal ears, without saying much. Just as everyone entered the forbidden area in the back mountain, the whole village was filled with a joyful atmosphere. The villagers packed their belongings and luggage in large and small packages, with unconcealed joy on their faces. As long as the holy envoy walks out of the forbidden area, he can lead them back to the human race's ancestral land they have long dreamed of. The old village chief in his twilight years held a cane, looked at the busy appearance of the villagers passing by, stroked his graying beard, and smiled kindly. As long as the villagers can get rid of the miserable life of being in danger from day to day, even if he has to violate the ancestral teachings and bear this eternal sin, what's the harm? However, just as the whole village was immersed in the festive atmosphere, a dark cloud floated over the sky in the distance. A noisy sound came from the entrance of the village. The old man standing in the village looked in the direction of the sound, but saw a figure running wildly in the distance. Looking carefully, it was actually a village guard covered in blood. Ashoo! The village chief immediately recognized that this person was the guard at the entrance of the village, and the surrounding villagers also put down their work when they saw this. The blood-stained man rolled and crawled into the village, and stumbled and fell to the ground. Everyone looked carefully and found that the man's chest had been pierced with a tear, and blood was still pouring out. Quick, run, aliens, aliens are attacking. Every time the guard said a word, a large pool of blood spit out of his mouth. At the end, he spit out a mouthful of blood and died completely. What, alien, alien? All the villagers looked at the dead man lying on the ground in panic, but at this moment, the sand under their feet suddenly shook. Everyone looked at the entrance of the village in horror, and saw an extremely large alien army rushing towards them from the direction of the village entrance. One after another, tall and burly black figures were fierce, and the humans they passed were directly swallowed and disinfected by the army. Quick, run! No one knew who screamed first, and the whole village was in chaos in an instant, running for their lives. Swoosh! A dense rain of spears and arrows suddenly shot down from the sky, piercing through all the fleeing humans on the ground. Some humans looked up in horror, and saw armored soldiers riding on birds and beasts. A pair of indifferent eyes seemed to regard the humans on the ground as livestock to be slaughtered, and they pulled their bows and arrows without hesitation to shoot the ants on the ground. Blood mixed with wind and sand swept across a corner of the desert, and a bloody massacre unfolded in this human village. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 546. Fires ignited in the dim tunnel, lighting up the unknown passage ahead. Gurren, Baron, and others held burning torches and walked carefully along the tunnel. From time to time, gloomy white bones appeared under their feet, which made everyone who had just witnessed the resurrection of these bones feel frightened. Although they didn't know how the suffocating evil spirit dissipated, they no longer dared to take it lightly at this moment. You know, this was the retreat place of a demon lord in the past. Hong Lian picked up the burning torch and walked forward. Suddenly, the dark field of vision in front suddenly became wider. Everyone walked out of the passage, raised the torches in their hands, and illuminated the field of vision in front of them. They were all shocked by the scene in front of them. They saw that they were in an extremely majestic and empty hall. It was hard to imagine that such a majestic hall was hidden inside the huge cliff outside. The main hall is surrounded by earth-yellow stone bricks. In the center of the main hall, there is an unknown monster stone statue standing. In addition, the main hall seemed empty, and even the skeletons of the zombies in the tunnel were missing. This is the deepest part of the forbidden area. Everyone cautiously walked to the monster stone statue in the center of the hall, only to find a stone tablet standing in front of the statue. Apart from that, there was nothing else, and there was no trace of the rumored magic weapon. Mu-Chiu stood in front of the stone tablet. Through the surrounding firelight, the writings engraved on the stone tablet were particularly obvious. Qi Xiaoxiao beside him read aloud. In the 12th year of the Eternal Night Calendar, the second-generation Demon Lord Yasha understood the meaning of life and death here, advanced to the realm of the Demon Lord, and killed countless powerful corpses. Since then, he has established himself as the hegemon of the Eternal Night Dynasty in the Apocalypse. Bit. There were stars twinkling in the girl's eyes. She didn't expect that the Demon Lord who was promoted here was actually the Yasha Demon Lord she admired most. The second-generation Demon Lord is known as the strongest existence after the Lord of Eternal Night, and the Empress who unified the zombie clan to suppress the apocalypse. Hong Lian quietly moved the torch to the bottom of the stone tablet, and then read. However, the way of life and death changes rapidly. After the demon lord broke through, this place was deeply affected by the way of life and death, and turned into the junction of life and death. Undead are often at work, and all living things are in ruins. In order to balance the yin and yang of heaven and earth, the second-generation demon lord left the former demon soldiers here and injected supreme demonic energy into them, using evil energy to suppress the evil spirits and undead, and to rectify the changes for the living. Everyone's expressions changed, and they remembered that the resurrected zombie skeletons they had just encountered along the way turned out to be triggered by the overflowing evil spirit. The reason why the second-generation demon lord left his personal demon soldiers behind was precisely to suppress the evil spirits infected by the will of life and death. My descendants must remember not to touch the magic weapon sealed here, otherwise the balance of yin and yang will be imbalanced, life and death will alternate, and disaster will arise. This warning was obviously given to future generations by the ancestors of the human race who guarded this place. After Hong Lian finished reciting the words on the stone tablet, she and her companions looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what to do. At this point, will they take this magic weapon or not? However, they don't even know where this magic weapon is banned. Where is that magic weapon? While everyone was at a loss, Mu Qiu in the crowd slowly walked forward. Senior, Hong Lian looked at Mu Qiu's back and asked. Mu Qiu walked to the stone statue standing in the center of the hall, with a trace of reminiscence in her eyes, and took out the 7-color stone plate from the demon's box. As soon as the stone plate appeared, it bloomed with dazzling colorful light and floated into the air. The next second, the monster-like stone statue released a burst of colorful light beams from its chest. Click. With a shattering sound, the appearance of the several-meter-high stone statue in front of him began to slowly break, revealing the metal shell underneath. Mu Qiu stood with her hands behind her hands, looking at the broken stone statue in front of her like a spider web, and murmured. The name of this magic weapon is Apocalypse Mecha. As Mu Qiu finished speaking, the monster-like stone statue's appearance was completely shattered. What appeared in front of everyone was a tall mecha with a shell shining with blue light. This is... Everyone looked at the huge transformation of the stone statue, their faces were shocked, and they were dumbfounded. In this era, human technology has completely declined, and even the introduction of mechas is only a few words in the history books. Everyone could not imagine the terrifying destructive power of the steel monster in front of them, but simply felt that the aura exuding from this monster was particularly terrifying. It is like a knight, guarding a territory immovable, suppressing any evil spirits who intend to corrode the world for thousands of years. The next second, the groove on the chest of the Apocalypse Mecha glowed brightly, and the colorful stone plate suspended in mid-air was slowly embedded into the groove. A flash of red light suddenly flashed in the pupils of the Apocalypse Mecha, as if a knight who had been sleeping for thousands of years had completely awakened. At the same time, the colorful rays of light on his chest suddenly converged and turned into a hazy red beam of light that shot down. Looking at this hazy beam of light, Mu Qiu's eyes flashed. He waved his arm and a white light door appeared in his palm. In the blink of an eye, the invisible door of light continued to spread forward. In the clouds and mist, iron chains like dragons and pythons tightly wrapped around the closed door. This is the gate of reincarnation. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 547. An ancient and majestic aura was released from the gate of samsara, just at the moment when the gate of samsara appeared. The hazy beam of light gathered on the chest of the Apocalypse Mech shot straight into the gate of samsara. In an instant, the gate of samsara actually emitted dazzling dark red light, and the entire gate was rendered dark red. Then, the red light shot towards Mu Qiu, wrapping Mu Qiu in it impartially. And Mu Qiu's figure gradually dimmed with the shining of the red light, and entered the red gate of Samsara. What happened just now? Where is the holy envoy? Where is the holy envoy? In the empty hall, everyone's face was full of horror and confusion. They could not see the existence of the gate of Samsara, and only remembered that the huge armored monster shot out a hazy dark red beam of light from its chest. Immediately after Muchu was irradiated with the red light, he disappeared in front of them. Just as everyone was panicking, a series of cracking sounds came from the rocks above their heads. The red-haired Manayu raised his head, and this sight made his scalp numb and his pupils vibrate. You look. Ayu pointed in the direction of his head with a trembling tone, his tone terrified. Everyone raised torches and looked in the direction of the sound, and instantly took a breath of cold air. What is that? The rocks above their heads were actually wriggling violently like a surging tide. The sand and rocks on the surface of the cliff were broken, and what was tumbling out from below were hideous white skulls. Roar! Countless zombie skulls seemed to be embedded in the rocks, and pairs of black eye sockets stared at the people below, making suffocating roars. Recalling the words on the stone tablet, everyone suddenly realized that the entire mountain outside was made up of these creepy bones. What they entered was not a forbidden area on the cliff, but a skeleton cemetery of zombies who were buried here thousands of years ago. Before everyone could react, the white zombie skeletons kept popping out from the surrounding rock walls, baring their teeth and claws, trying to break out of the ground and kill all the creatures in front of them. At this moment, they were surrounded by thousands of ferocious corpses and had no escape. It's over, it's over, it's really over now. Everyone's heart was completely shrouded in despair, and the terrifying number of these skeletons alone was beyond their reach. Ayu had squatted down in fear and covered his head. After a few breaths, the terrifying roars in his ears gradually faded away strangely. Everything around him suddenly became extremely quiet. Ayu opened his eyes and looked up hurriedly, but found that there was a blue sky above his head. Not to mention the countless skeletons just now, even the surrounding rock walls were gone. They seemed to have returned to the mountain behind the village, but the tall cliff disappeared just like Muchu just now, as if it had evaporated from the face of the earth. Everything that happened in the Forbidden Land seemed like a dream, and even Chuanzi, the elder who walked out of the ancestral land, couldn't figure out what happened. Only the armored steel monster was still standing in front, suggesting that everything in front of everyone was not a dream. Just then, someone suddenly shouted, "Look, over there in the village." Everyone subconsciously looked at the village behind them, and found that under the clear sky and broad daylight, the village was actually on fire, murderous aura was rising, and a layer of dark haze was covered in the sky. Oh no, something happened in the village. Honglian and others didn't bother to recall the experience in the Forbidden Land, and galloped towards the direction of the village at full speed. The village built in the desert Gobi was in full view, but the closer to the village, the more obvious the bloody smell mixed with gravel in the air. When everyone arrived at the village, a corner of the village had been completely burned by the fire. The ground was full of broken corpses of villagers, and some people's faces even had a longing for their homeland and a yearning for future life. What happened to the village? The companions who had been laughing and talking with them not long ago have now become cold corpses. When everyone rushed to the depths of the village, a more terrifying massacre was unfolding. The surviving villagers fled in all directions, and behind them were countless alien legions chasing them. Bows and arrows fell from the sky, shooting the fleeing humans one by one. There were also some guards composed of aliens with superpowers among the villagers, holding magic soldiers, fighting desperately with the alien armies in the center of the fire. However, the human side was doomed to lose in this battle of unequal strength from the beginning. Having lived in the desert for a long time, they were short of resources and their magic power was generally at level 5 or 6, so they were not considered strong. However, hundreds of human warriors had to face powerful enemies that were 10 times their number. With only the inferior magic soldiers in their hands, they were destined to be no match for these elite alien races. In a moment, the human warriors were beaten back by many burly orcs and were on the verge of collapse. I didn't expect there was still a fish that slipped through the net. Just as Hong Lian and the others appeared, a feminine voice suddenly sounded from a distance. At the same time, a slender tail attacked Hong Lian with the momentum of breaking through the air. Hong Lian felt something in her heart, and hurriedly jumped back, narrowly avoiding the attack. Even so, a hole was pierced in the corner of her windbreaker. She looked closely and found that the one who attacked her was a slender white giant python. The Viper Demon General among the three great demon generals of Bamo. As the leader of the Bamo people who succeeded his father, Hong Lian naturally knew that the snake man who turned into a giant python in front of him was a demon general level existence. I was wondering why the humans here are so vulnerable. It turns out that the humans who belong to the fire seed are hiding here. The Viper spit out a scarlet snake tongue, with a hint of humanized teasing in his pupils. Han Xiong, it's time to avenge the locusts. As the voice fell, a roar came from the other side of the crowd. A burly figure wearing armor and with a bare head and a human body holding a broadsword, cut a bloody path through the fleeing crowd and rushed towards Hong Lian and others. The fierce bear demon general carried an indomitable and domineering momentum, and wherever he passed, there were pieces of broken bodies and bloody winds. Just as the huge body of the fierce bear was about to hit the crowd, the fierce figure was suddenly blocked by a figure. Elder Chuan's. The middle-aged man who walked out of the ancestral land was holding a staff flashing with blue light, and blocked the broadsword of the fierce bear impartially. As a holy envoy sent by the ancestral land, Chuan's is also a powerful 9th-level demon general. On the other side, Hong Lian Baron and others also fought fiercely with the attacking aliens around them in an instant. A dozen of Elder Chuan's men took out their personal demon soldiers to resist the arrows and spears from the sky. They are also the carefully selected elites of the human race, who can follow Elder Chuan's out of their ancestral land and come to the northern desert. So far, a war between the human race and the alien race has completely entered a white-hot stage. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 548. In a dark red silent space, Mu Qiu floated up in the air and walked through the air. Next to him, there was a girl with animal ears floating with her eyes closed. Interesting, is this the world of 6 paths of reincarnation? Mu Qiu was in an unknown space, but there was no trace of panic on her face. Instead, she was watching the scene in front of her with interest. Time and space are frozen here, and the sky and the earth seem to be connected together. Everything you see is blood red, and just standing here makes people shudder. Mu Qiu rubbed her chin, suddenly feeling that the space here was somewhat similar to his shadow world. Because of traveling through reincarnation, his shadow space is also limited by time and space and cannot connect to this world. Otherwise, he really wants to try what kind of result releasing endless darkness in this space will lead to. I just don't know which of the 6 paths this place belongs to. While Mu Qiu was thinking secretly, a faint purple light suddenly flashed from her chest, and a square box also appeared. It's the monster's box. With a swish sound, a beam of blood light burst out of the monster's box, and a demon knife with a crimson blood blade appeared in front of Mu Qiu. As if being washed and baptized by blood, blood flowed on the demon knife, extremely magnificent. The demon sword Yan Mo is soul devouring and bloodthirsty. Seeing the Yaodao's excited appearance, Mu Qiu already had a vague suspicion in her mind, and turned to look at the animal-eared girl beside her, whose eyes were closed and she fell into a coma. Mu Qiu became more and more curious about Qi Xiao Xiao. Ordinary people couldn't even see the existence of the gate of reincarnation. But the little guy in front of him can not only feel the invisible and qualityless reincarnation, but he can also enter the 6 paths of reincarnation like Mu Qiu. You must know that Mu Qiu is the holder of the gate of reincarnation, otherwise even if he wants to enter reincarnation, it will be difficult for him to see the way. However, as soon as she entered, she couldn't bear the pressure of reincarnation and fell into a coma. The strength of the little girl was indeed evident. Chi Xiao Xiao frowned, as if he had a nightmare, biting his lower lip subconsciously, and his body began to tremble unconsciously. Just as Mu Qiu secretly shook her head, the bloody space around her suddenly began to change. I saw the space twisting in all directions, making waves like a tidal wave. Roar! Skeletons and white bones climbed out from the depths of the blood sea, exuding frightening energy fluctuations, and attacked Mu Qiu with bared teeth and claws. After absorbing some kind of existence in the blood sea, each skeleton monster's body actually began to grow infinitely, and its strength was not comparable to those of the zombie skeletons in the forbidden area before. The sea of blood in front of him was almost endless, and all he could see were endless skeleton monsters. In an instant, Mu Qiu was surrounded by countless undead. Countless pairs of sharp white claws were waving towards Mu Qiu, and the black eye sockets were staring at Mu Qiu, trying to seize every inch of his flesh and blood soul. Seeing this scene further confirmed Mu Qiu's suspicion. He had already guessed who was in the bloody space at this moment. One of the 6 reincarnations experienced by all living beings, the realm of hungry ghosts. Looking at the many evil spirits climbing up, the sharp claws were swung in the direction of Mu Qiu. It was like being on a crumbling arc in this blood-red space. A sneer appeared on Mu Qiu's lips. It seems you really want to devour me. The demon sword with blood flowing in front of him has already begun to tremble with excitement. In that case, the corners of Mu Qiu's mouth opened and closed slightly, and her flying hair grew crazily behind her. The hair was stained red by the blood. 6 rounds of megatama circled and intertwined in his eyes, and a bloody full moon could be faintly seen in the depths of his pupils. Even the appearance of his face became evil and handsome. The flames on his body rose up, like a mighty dragon cruising around, turning into a flickering candle dragon armor. The aura around him was domineering and powerful, unparalleled in evil. Behind him, a black and red full moon actually rose in the originally empty blood-colored space. The dead souls who were close to Mu Qiu were shaken to their cores by this domineering momentum, and the sea of blood beneath their feet began to boil and ripple. At this moment, Mu Qiu is the Lord of Eternal Night who is unparalleled in the world and who alone resists the will of heaven. The eyes of the surrounding undead skeletons showed a touch of human fear, but they still stretched out their skeletal claws towards Mu Qiu without hesitation, with a majestic evil force. Since you want to be freed as soon as possible, then. In the Zilong state, Mu Qiu looked even more domineering and crazy, with a look of madness on his face. This time, he did not summon the Evernight King sword, but reached out and pulled out the Yama demon sword in front of him. Today I will turn the sea of blood upside down. The dark red figure stood upright in the sea of blood, swung the demon knife in his hand and inserted it into the deep sea of blood at his feet. In an instant, the sea of blood surged, and the blood in the vast sea of blood boiled violently as if it had evaporated. The undead skeletons that relied on the sea of blood to survive began to wail in pain. On the other hand, the bloody demon sword in Mu Qiu's hand was glowing red, and the blood threads on the blade continued to shrink and gather, greedily absorbing the blood soul hidden deep in the sea of blood. After a few breaths, Mu Qiu suddenly pulled out the demon sword and swung it forward. A magnificent bloody sword light suddenly bloomed. The undead skeletons wherever they passed were not enemies at all, and they turned into streaks of powder and were destroyed in the sea of blood. And more blood flowed uncontrollably towards the demon knife in Mu Qiu's hand, and the dead souls hidden in the sea of blood began to wail in pain before they appeared. The Yama demon sword is like an insatiable baby, greedily sucking up the blood souls all around it. Despite this, Mu Qiu was still not satisfied. He jumped up and burst into black and red flames. Black mixed with red flames swirled and condensed beneath him, and finally merged into a giant skeleton dozens of meters high. The skeleton giant is half a ferocious skeleton, and half is scarlet flesh. It has 2 horns on its head, holds flames on its body, and there is a vague thunder and lightning under its feet. This is Muchu's re-evolved Susanoo Titan, the true form of Inma. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 549. In a remote village located on the border of the northern desert, fires were everywhere, and surging magic energy surged into the sky in the center of the village. Countless villagers fled like ants on a hot pot, and behind them were a large number of alien figures. A massacre against the human race is going on fiercely, and the sky above is covered with a layer of haze. The surrounding houses collapsed one after another, accompanied by the screams and wails of humans. The smell of burning flames and flesh merged together, making the air smell extremely fishy and disgusting. Careful! An exclamation came from his ears. Baron's face darkened and he turned around suddenly. When he raised his hands, they turned into a pair of iron arms to block him. There was just a whoosh sound, and a beam of white light shot out from a distance, instantly hitting Baron's crossed arms. There was a sound of steel cutting from his black iron arms, and veins popped up on Baron's face as he endured the tearing pain. The whirling white light had returned to its original path in the next second. Baron retracted his crossed arms, only to find that there were several long and narrow blood marks on his arms that were deep enough to show the bones. There were still faint traces of blackening on the wound, and the sharp weapon that had just attacked him was clearly poisonous. There was another swish sound, and the whirling white light had returned to the original owner's hands. The Viper demon waved his palm back to retract his weapon. At this moment, he had transformed into a human form. Not only did his voice sound feminine, but his face was as gentle as a woman's. The skin color is extremely pale, the upper body is still in the shape of a human body, but the lower body is actually a huge snake tail several meters long. And there was a white folding fan in his hand, with mottled blood stains on the wings. The magic weapon that attacked Balon just now was actually this folding fan. Hee. Covering his face with a folding fan, Viper was about to speak when a scorching gust of wind suddenly hit his ears. Viper quickly raised the folding fan and stood at his side, only to see a ball of hot fire suddenly bombarding him from behind, hitting the folding fan in the blink of an eye. Even Viper took several steps back to block the incoming fireball. Even so, the white jade folding fan made of unknown material in his hand was still not destroyed. Looking at the scorched marks on his beloved folding fan, Viper's face suddenly showed anger, and he turned his head to look in the direction of the fireball. Not far from him, a red-haired Honglian was holding a shotgun. She attached the flame to the bullet and fired the fireball. The bullet flames blessed by the flames were extremely powerful, but at the cost of this, the shotgun in her hand was completely damaged. After all, this was not a magic weapon that could carry magic energy. Haha, you are worthy of being a human in fire. After all, there are some differences from those human slaves. Viper looked at the flame in Honglian's hand with cold eyes. Being cold-blooded by nature, he was most disgusted with flames. In that case, let's get rid of you first. A cold murderous intention flashed in his pupils, and in the blink of an eye, the Viper had leapt tens of meters violently, and the poisonous folding fan was also thrown into the air, aiming to kill Honglian with one blow. Not good. Honglian's eyes were startled, and her fists condensed scorching fire to fight the Viper. Although they are both 9th-level demon generals, Honglian has only been promoted for a few months. There is naturally a certain gap between him and senior demon generals like Viper. He can barely compete with him by relying on his attribute restraint. Even if this is the case on Honglian's side, it will be even more difficult for other human warriors to fight against these alien armies that are 10 times more numerous. Elder Kaways, wearing a blue robe, held a crystal blue staff and fought with the powerful bear. The rest of the human race aliens fell into an extremely passive disadvantage. The aliens wearing armor were like locusts crossing the border, harvesting the lives of the fleeing humans. In the sky, countless alien warriors riding alien beasts dropped spears and arrows all over the sky, shooting through the humans on the ground fighting the aliens. For a time, there were countless casualties on the human side, and the team of hundreds of people was reduced by half in the blink of an eye. What a sin! The old village chief looked at the collapsed houses and corpses on the ground while leaning on a cane, and his muddy eyes gradually became moist. He worked hard, and finally even went against the precepts of his ancestors to lead his people to live a stable life, but the final outcome turned out to be like this. The village chief looked at the massacred people in the distance, determination flashing in his eyes. Even if he fights with his old bones today, he still wants to leave some incense for the clan. The village chief discarded the crutch in his hand, his head hung down, his body trembled slightly, and there was faint magic energy leaking out of his body. The next second, the old man's rickety body began to swell inch by inch, his muscles bulged, and his body surface glowed with an abnormal red light. The sound of clothes tearing was heard, and the old village chief turned into a muscular man several feet tall. In the distance, the battle between Hong Lian and Viper has become more and more intense, and both sides have injuries of varying sizes. But Hong Lian not only has to fight Vipers, but also has to deal with sneak attacks from all directions at all times, and the situation is critical. Hong Lian swung out a punch and just knocked away the spinning fan, but suddenly a gust of wind suddenly rose behind him. As soon as she turned around, she only saw a sharp spear stabbing her face. An orc seized the gap between Hong Lian's battle and stabbed Hong Lian in the back with a spear. At the critical moment, a huge body suddenly blocked her, and a huge force instantly blasted the orc backwards, directly penetrating the house behind. Hong Lian stared at the huge figure in front of her with wide eyes, and said in surprise, "Grandpa village chief." The village chief, who had transformed into a muscular man, was oozing with thick blood all over his body, and even the flowing blood threads could be clearly seen on his body surface. This village chief was also a powerful demon general in his youth. "Go, leave here." After saying this, bright red blood had already seeped out of the village chief's mouth. Maintaining this form is consuming his few lifespans all the time. He glanced at Hong Lian, and then turned around and threw himself into the alien army in front. In a flash, the alien army had been beaten to countless casualties by the village chief's huge force, and the village chief's muscular body also had countless interlaced scars. Village chief. The survivors looked at the old man covered in blood with shock in their eyes. "Hurry up and leave the village." The old man raised his hand and crushed an orc's head, shouting to his companions in the distance. "Humph, your courage is commendable, but it's a pity that it ends here." Just then, a low voice came from the sky, accompanied by an undisguised wave of terror, crushing the people below. Feeling this majestic wave of magic energy, everyone on the battlefield changed their faces. The alien army chasing humans gave up their target, stopped and knelt down. Even the two demon generals, Viper and Bear, stopped fighting, and bowed to the ground regardless of their injuries. "Welcome to the Lord." At this moment, the Lord who commands the entire northern desert finally arrived here. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 550. In a void of blood-red space, a blood moon could be vaguely seen hovering in the sky. The wailing of the undead had completely disappeared, and the whole world fell into a deathly silence. Under the blood moon, Mewtwo, wearing the candle dragon armor, stood in the air with dark red long hair, and his temperament was evil and charming. In front of him, a blood-red strange longsword appeared, which was the companion weapon of the box of the ghost, www. Demon Sword Yama. Unlike usual, the demon sword at this moment had no more fierce aura than before, and the blood threads attached to the blade converged and turned into a crystal clear rose red. As the blade turned, accompanied by strange streams of light, it looked like gorgeous cherry blossoms flying and falling. At the same time, the box of the ghost on Mewtwo's chest emerged, and the single eye on the box released a strange blood-red light. In this hungry ghost realm that all spirits fear, there are countless dead souls, but it has become the most joyful hunting ground for the demon sword. The boundless sea of blood, along with the countless dead souls hidden in it, have now become food for the demon sword to grow. After devouring the blood souls of the hungry ghost realm, the demon sword has gradually grown in a direction that Mewtwo could not predict. The demon sword that originally accompanied the box of the monsters could never have such great potential. But after Mewtwo signed a contract with the box of the monsters, the latter contained a trace of Mewtwo's devouring power, and its devouring ability for blood souls and the like was more than several times stronger. And everything in the hungry ghost realm perfectly matches the abilities of the box of the monsters and the demon sword. Even Mewtwo was surprised by this amazing change. The gorgeous blade trembled slightly, expressing its excitement to Mewtwo. Only Mewtwo, the Supreme King, could subdue this peerless weapon in front of him. Mewtwo nodded, and as soon as he thought about it, a beam of blood light flashed on the crystal clear demon sword. The blood light rushed to the sky like a river pouring down, and the invisible sea of blood poured back into the world. For a moment, countless dead souls were raging with the beams of light rising to the sky, and the murderous aura was magnificent. And the world where Mewtwo was seemed to be conquered, the bloody world gradually became dim, and only the sea of blood was surging. A strange energy gathered and turned into a simple door in front of Mewtwo. The door of reincarnation. Unlike before, this door was dark red, as if a hideous evil ghost opened its huge mouth and swallowed all the creatures in front of it. But Mewtwo just smiled slightly, and just as he was about to step into the door, the scene around him suddenly changed. The bloody sky was gradually covered by a dark cloud, and even the ground beneath his feet became substantial and had a shape. Roar! Bursts of crazy roars echoed in his ears. Mewtwo looked up and saw that he was surrounded by hideous zombie monsters. At a glance, he was actually in a sea of blood and corpses. Mewtwo stretched out his finger calmly and passed it through the body of the zombie in front of him, but the latter did not react at all, but just rolled his eyes and bulged, staring at a corner of the sky. This is an extremely real illusion. Mewtwo looked up and saw that the sky was actually full of ferocious monsters. The world was filled with an extremely heavy atmosphere of terror, and in the sky surrounded by countless zombie monsters, a slender figure could be vaguely seen standing in the air. This is a cold and beautiful woman with long hair down to her waist, wearing a corseted long skirt, with a kind of aloofness between her eyebrows. The woman exuded a cool aura, and just standing there gave people a sense of dead silence that no one should approach. Even the zombie monsters around her were inferior to her. Facing the siege of countless zombies and tens of thousands of vicious gazes, the woman's face showed no expression. Which, if you tell us where the Lord of Eternal Night is now and join our holy church, we can still spare your life. A figure covered in red robes suddenly rose from the surging zombies, also floating in the air, confronting the woman surrounded in the distance. When this figure in red robes appeared, a beam of light suddenly flashed in Mewtwo's eyes. This mysterious figure in red robes was Mewtwo's old friend, the alien sect and the 12 sacrificial immortals. The cold woman who was surrounded by tens of thousands of zombies said in a cold voice, "With you, you are not worthy of the teacher's help." The red-robed figure snorted, "You are stubborn. I want to see if the Lord of the Eternal Night can still endure it after the Eternal Night dynasty is destroyed." He raised his hand and waved it, and tens of thousands of zombies roared in unison, with amazing power. "As long as I, Shwekanya, am alive, I will never let you offend my Nightland." The woman raised her hand, and a majestic life and death Taoism swept across the world. Everywhere she passed, the zombies turned into dead souls and dry bones, the world fell, and life was cut off. The next moment, the space behind the woman suddenly twisted into a series of dark vortices, and a series of black and purple figures roared out from the black space, full of evil spirits. 8 wastelands, all races surrender. Instantly, countless purple-black figures collided with the surrounding zombies, and a shocking battle began. The mysterious red-robed man did not expect the woman's strength to be so amazing. He looked at the black-haired woman in disbelief and said, "Deyuan level, you actually broke through to the Deyuan level." The red-robed man's exclamation was quickly drowned out by the screams of the zombies below, and the surging zombie tide was crushed and swept by the more terrifying Eternal Night Royal family in the blink of an eye. Countless zombies died in the alternation of the Deo of life and death, turning into undead spirits floating in space. The red-robed man stared at the cold woman for a moment, no longer speaking. The space behind him twisted, and he disappeared in an instant. And in the next moment, the uncontrolled zombie monsters were quickly disinfected by the fierce Eternal Night Royal family, and the ground was full of broken flesh and blood. Muchu, who witnessed all this, stood in place. It seemed that this was what happened 1,000 years ago, and it was presented in front of him with the power of the 6 paths.